To work along with this course, you will need a few applications. You will need a text editor or an IDE, a terminal, and the Vue DevTools plugin, which is available for Google Chrome and Firefox. You can use whatever editor or IDE you want to. Popular editors are Sublime Text, Atom, VS Code, and WebStorm. I will use WebStorm during this course, and I recommend you that you download their free trial because it works great with Vue and a lot of other JavaScript frameworks. If you prefer a free editor, I recommend VS Code. WebStorm has great support for VueJS, but if you are using another editor, you will most likely need to install an extension for VueJS to get syntax highlighting and other handy features. For VS Code specifically, there is an official Vue extension called Vetour. Fortunately, a Vue extension exists for every popular editor or IDE, so you can use the one that you feel the most comfortable with. I have put together a list of editors and plugins in the description below this video. We will also need a terminal. If you are on Mac or Linux, then you already have a terminal installed. I am on Mac and I use iTerm because it gives me some extra productivity features. An equally good terminal is Hyper.js. Hyper.js is entirely built with JavaScript and it is available for Mac, Linux, and Windows. So, you have some options if you would like to try something other than the default terminal. I guess you already have a browser, and just so you know, I will be using Google Chrome during the course. I strongly recommend you to install Vue DevTools, which is an extension for Chrome and Firefox that helps us debug VueJS applications. You can install it for free directly from Firefox or Chrome Web Store. It will be very helpful later on, and I can't imagine debugging the application without it. By the time of the recording, Vue 3 is only supported by the Vue DevTools beta version, so I will be using that. Find the most up-to-date link in the description of this lesson. We have linked the beta version now, and we will update it when Vue DevTools stable adds support for Vue 3. In general, it doesn't matter which tools you decide to work with. It will be easy to follow along anyhow. If you are implementing Vue in an existing application or using it as a small part of your website, you can include it from a CDN. But when you are going to create a single-page application from scratch, you will benefit from starting your project using the official command line tool Vue CLI. Vue CLI creates a boilerplate application so you can start developing immediately. In order to use it, we need to have installed Node.js, a package manager like npm or yarn, and Git. Node.js is an open source environment for developing server-side and networking applications. Before, we only had the possibility to run JavaScript client-side on a visitor's browser, but now we can run it server-side as well. This opens up a lot of exciting opportunities. npm stands for Node Package Manager. A package manager lets you install open source and private libraries, and it also helps you with automated tasks like keeping track of dependencies and other things. To install Node and npm, you can visit nodejs.org, navigate to the download page, and grab the one for your operating system. You have the option to go with a long-time support version or with the latest stable one. The latest stable will get you access to the newest goodies as soon as possible. The LTS version will be getting updates for about 30 months for the developers that have not upgraded to a newer version. Feel free to choose any of these, it won't make a difference. Once installed, open your terminal and type node-v and npm-v. If everything worked, you will see the installed versions. If these commands don't work, then you might need to restart your terminal or even your computer if you are on Windows. Yarn is an alternative package manager to npm. It used to be faster and have more features than npm, but today both package managers have about the same speed and offer almost the same features. So using npm or yarn doesn't make a difference in the course and very likely in your work too. I will be mainly using npm in this course, but feel free to go with yarn if you prefer. The last thing you need is Git. Git is a version control system that, among other things, tracks changes in your code and makes it easy to collaborate with other developers. If you are on Mac, there is a chance that you have Git installed by default. On Windows, if you use Git bash, you already have Git. If you are not sure if Git is installed, you can run git ---- version in your terminal. To install it or to download the latest version, you should go to git-scm.com and navigate to the download section. Then grab the one for your system, follow the installer, and you are good to go. Now that we have everything we need, we can install the Vue CLI. To install Vue CLI globally, we will run npm install -g at vue/cli or yarn global add at vue/cli. To follow along with the course, you must ensure that the Vue CLI tool is on version 4 or higher. Otherwise, you will not be able to create Vue 3 applications. Once Vue CLI is installed, you will have access to the Vue command everywhere in your terminal. To verify that it is installed, you can run vue ---- version and you will see the installed version, which should be 4.something. If you already had Vue CLI installed and you have an older major version, then make sure you upgrade it to the latest version. To upgrade Vue CLI, you may need to uninstall it first. To uninstall an npm package, we can use the uninstall command. In this case, that would be npm uninstall -g at vue/cli. The -g flag stands for global and must be used when the package is globally installed. If you are watching from the future and you are using a newer version, there might be some differences in comparison with the lessons. When the next major version of the Vue CLI is released, we will upgrade together. Now that you have Vue CLI installed globally, you can run the Vue command in your terminal to see all the options that Vue CLI provides. As you can see, Vue CLI can do quite a lot. During the course, we will explore and use most of these commands. In the next lesson, we will use Vue CLI to create our application. Now that we have installed Vue CLI, we can use it to scaffold our project. Vue CLI will give us a pre-configured boilerplate that comes with a lot of goodies to kickstart our project. Of course, you could configure a project from scratch, but using a boilerplate will save you a lot of time so you can focus only on your code. To bootstrap a new application with Vue CLI, we need to call the Vue create command. This command accepts an argument, which is the name of the app that will be created. First, the Vue CLI creates a folder with the same name as the name of the app, and then the Vue 3 app will be created inside the folder. Let's open our terminal and navigate to the folder where we are planning to bootstrap our Vue project. My folder where I place my projects is called code. If you want to create the project in the current directory without creating a subfolder, you can call it with a dot instead of the project name, like this, Vue create dot. Since I want a new folder to be created, I will pass my project name here to the create command. Feel free to choose any name you like. I will call mine Vue School Forum. Now that the process started, you will go through a list of questions that will help you configure the application details. The first question will ask us which preset we are going to use. Since we are creating a Vue 3 application, we will select default Vue 3 preview. If your future applications have different requirements, you can choose one of the other presets. Let's wait a bit while Vue CLI downloads and validates the components it needs to generate the application. depending on your NPM cache and network conditions, it might take from a few seconds up to a minute. If you wanted to customize the bootstrapped application, you would choose manually select features and you would get more configuration options. For us, Vue 3, Bubble, and ESLint are perfect. Now that the app creation is done, we can view our first application in the browser by navigating to our new project folder and running npm run serve or yarn serve. And congratulations! You have created a Vue 3 application. I have opened the project we just created in my IDE. Now let's explore the structure. The node modules directory contains the downloaded modules our project uses. Every time we install a new library using npm or yarn, it ends up in here. The public folder contains static files that will be generated during the build process and placed into the build directory. This folder also includes an important file, the index.html. The index file is the page template where our Vue instance will be running. Here we see this div with the ID of app where the Vue app will be attached. Next, the src directory contains our application's code. The components directory is where our components will live. Initially, it comes with a hello world component that displays the list of useful Vue links that we see when we open our application in the browser. Here is where we will place the components that we create. The assets folder is intended for storing various static files that your application will use, such as images and style sheets. The files you place in the assets directory, opposite to the assets in the public directory, will be processed by Webpack. This makes them flexible and will be minified, encoded, cleaned up, and so on when you are building the application for production. So the assets in here are a part of your source code. The app.vue file is the so-called root component and is the Vue component instance that will have all the other components in it. Think of app.vue as the body tag of an HTML page. Currently, app.vue imports the hello world component and displays it in its template along with a VueJS logo. The app component can also be used to contain global styling for the application. We will learn more about the root component in future lessons. The main.js file is the application's entry file. Here is where we initialize our Vue application instance. Later, when we will be adding more functionality, such as routing, state management, etc., this file will be used for instantiating and connecting the plugins to our Vue application. And that's the overview of the src directory. Next, we have some configuration files. Let's take a look at our package.json. The package.json file holds general information about the project, like the name, the version, and so on. The scripts property is an object of aliases for the commands we can run in the terminal, using yarn or npm run and the name of the command. For example, npm run serve will invoke the Vue CLI to start running the project in the development mode. If your editor supports it, you can run a script directly from here and see what happens. You can always add your own script shortcuts to run specific tasks in your project. Later in package.json, we have the list of the libraries we are using in the project. This one is filled by Vue CLI while creating a new project. Later, when we will add more dependencies by using npm install, packages will be automatically added to the list. The dev dependencies are the packages our project relies on while developing and are not needed when running in production. Besides those, package.json may contain other settings related to the project, such as the repository address, license information, settings of the linter, preferred Node.js version, and so on. You can check out the npm documentation for more information. The root directory also contains other configuration files, like the bubble configuration and the git ignore that tells Git which files to exclude from versioning. There is nothing else you need to know here in order to start coding. Before we dive into the code, there is one topic I would like to talk a bit more about, and that is linting. This and the next lesson are optional. So, if you don't want to or you feel uncomfortable linting your application, you can safely skip them. A linter is a utility software that programmatically reviews an application and reports suspicious code to the author. As a result, it reduces bugs and increases the quality and consistency of your code. There will be times when linting will annoy you to death, but linting will also save your future ass from deploying a horrible bug with a potential catastrophic consequence. In this lesson, we will talk about the JavaScript linter ESLint and some general pros and cons to get you familiarized with the subject. In a nutshell, ESLint checks your code and yells at you every time it notices a mistake. To get started, let's take a look at how ESLint works. There is an online demo where we can check it out. I will paste some code here that technically works and see the error messages on the right. The first thing we see is a parsing error. The keyword const is reserved. That's because const comes in ES6 and ESLint is not aware that we are using ES6. Let's take a look at the configuration. The first option is ECMA version, so let's switch that to 6. ECMAScript 6 is also called ECMAScript 2015. Now the parsing error went away, and we get a handful of linting errors. The first error, for instance, says that the name variable is assigned to a value but never used. This error is coming from the no one used vars rule. If you open that rule in a new tab, you can see a lot of information about it. You can configure ESLint based on your needs, and you can find all the rules and explanations on the ESLint website. Luckily, you don't need to choose all the settings and rules you want on your own because there are standard sets of rules available. A set of rules is called a preset. There is a preset provided by the ESLint organization called ESLint Recommended, and it includes all the rules that have this checkmark on the left. Okay, but we don't want to paste our code directly on eslint.org every time we want to lint it. Of course, we can install and run ESLint locally. For now, let's see how we use ESLint in our project. The three popular ways of using ESLint are via the command line, integrated in your code editor, and as a loader in Webpack. I find the first option to slow my workflow. And while I like to have ESLint integrated into my editor, I prefer to also use a Webpack loader to ensure that I don't miss anything. As you might have heard, it is pretty easy to integrate ESLint with the Vue CLI. In fact, our Vue CLI project comes with ESLint installed by default. I have opened our newly created project in my IDE, that is WebStorm. If you open your package.json file and look for ESLint, you will see that our Vue 3 application also comes with some configuration for ESLint. This configuration lives under the ESLint config option. The pieces that you will most likely need to change, if you have specific requirements, are the extends option and the rules. Extends is an array of the active presets, also known as collections of rules. As you see here, by default, our application extends the ESLint recommended preset that activates all the rules we saw on the ESLint website that had the checkmark on the left. Notice here that our application also extends the plugin Vue 3 Essential, that is a collection of rules specific to VueJS code. You can review these rules on the official Vue ESLint plugin website. I will put the link in the description of this lesson. If you decide to use another preset after some time, that's fine, you can come in here and change these values. But be aware that you will also have to install the new preset. The rules option includes a list of rules that you want to adjust. When you're working with a preset, your rules will override the preset's rules. One thing that I usually need during development is to define variables that I don't use. The ESLint recommended preset doesn't allow that. In order to disable this rule, I will add a new property with a rule name, and then I can set it to off. What I need here is the name of the rule. When working with ESLint, it is easy to find the name of the rule that you want to alter, since it is always provided along with the error. Let's define an unused variable within AppView to see what happens. In the browser, we now get an error coming from ESLint. Here we can see the name of the rule. You can then adjust it in your project settings or search for it on the ESLint documentation to learn more. Before disabling a rule, make sure to check this page on eslint.org to see why this rule applies and make sure that you really want to disable it. If you can't find the link for a rule, you can always browse the list of available rules or use the search. Back to our configuration file. The name of the rule I want to disable is no unused vars. Each rule has 3 states: error, warn, and off. If I want to disable it, I will set it to off. Since it is nice to see a warning to remind me that I might have forgotten an unused variable somewhere, I prefer to get a warning. Instead of the state names, we could also use the integer equivalents, which are 2 for error, 1 for warn, and 0 for off. I will set it to 1 for warn. Let's check again in the browser, but first we have to restart the development server in order for our changes to take effect. We now get the warning in our terminal. But in the browser, we don't get the overlay that's breaking the application anymore. That's great. Accordingly, if I set the rules value to 0, we won't see any warnings. Actually, I like to have unused variables during development, but I want to keep my code clean for production. So, I can set the rules value conditionally. If the application is being built for production, I want this rules value to be error. But if it's being built for development, I want it to be a warning. Sadly, this would not work inside the JSON file because it is not valid JSON syntax. What we can do to implement that is to use a dedicated configuration file. If you want to have the ESLint configuration options in their own file, you can create a file called eslint.rc.jes in the root directory of your project. Don't forget to add the starting dot here. ESLint will automatically pick up the settings from the eslint.rc file. I will move our linting rules and settings from package.json in here. As this is a JavaScript file, we need to export our configuration object. And that should do the trick. By the way, don't worry if this part of the code doesn't look familiar. You could easily find this condition on your own if you googled for something like different ESLint rules based on environment. Ta-da! Okay, now running npm run serve works just fine, but npm run build will fail because the no unused vars rule is not followed. When you configure your own rules, you should try as hard as possible to learn and adapt to the presets rules you are using instead of immediately disabling every rule you don't follow. You can configure all the ESLint rules you need on your own using a configuration file. But luckily, you don't need to pick all the settings you want because there are standard sets of rules available. A set of ESLint rules is called a preset. It is recommended to use a preset rather than creating a custom set of rules from scratch. There are many benefits, and some worth mentioning are that big companies often require that you follow their preset, and by being accustomed to linting with presets, you will be able to easily adapt to any sets of rules. The popular presets ensure quality code, because thousands of developers have used them and the community have polished and updated the rules together. It is also easier to collaborate with other developers, and you might learn a thing or two from the warnings as you code without spending time to study. So sometimes, presets are also a source of knowledge. The most popular ESLint presets are Standard and Airbnb. There are some major differences between these two. I have gathered the most common rules in a table to compare them. Both presets require two spaces for indentation. In comparison to Airbnb, the standard preset doesn't allow semicolons. Both presets enforce single quotes for string and strict equality, and in both presets we can't have trailing commas. You can take a look at each preset's documentation for a detailed explanation and choose the one that you like the best. The best way to learn and understand the preset is to install it and run it against your code. By default, our Vue 3 application uses the ESLint recommended preset. In this lesson, I will show you how to install and use my favorite preset, that is the one called Standard. There are many ways to install it and set it up. I will show you the way I consider the simplest, that is using the Vue CLI. Vue CLI has its own plugin system, and there are lots of plugins available. To add or change a preset, we can add again the ESLint plugin by running vue add ESLint. Once this runs, it will ask us which preset we want, and Standard is one of the options. So I will choose that and give it a minute. We got some errors here. Let's investigate. The errors are coming from the ESLint.rc file. So let's see what's going on there. It seems that the Vue CLI got confused, and instead of merging the new options, it added the properties again, which creates all the errors. Remember that Vue 3 is very new when I record this video, so Vue CLI might perform better for you. In case you get the same problem with me, you will need to remove the duplicate keys. If it just works, then you are good to go. To fix the errors in the ESLint file, I will keep the new settings and move over what we had initially. For the extents, we will need the Vue 3 plugin and the Vue standard. So I will delete the ESLint recommended. I will take this array and put it in a new object with the key extents into the newest properties that Vue CLI has added to this file. So I will copy it, I will paste it here, and I will remove the quotes. Let's see what we got next. I will remove the root, as this was meant to be the extends option. I will also remove the env since we have it in our new object in the bottom. I will remove the extents now that I have copied it over, and I will also remove the parser options because it is the same with what Vue CLI has added in the bottom. Lastly, I got this rules option where I want to get a warning in development and an error on production. So I will copy that in the new rules option instead of the warn that they have here as the default. And with that, we should be good to go. To test if the standard preset has been applied, I will add some more indentation to this line and expect to get an error. And that's the case. Notice that I get the ESLint error directly in the IDE and I can fix it before I try to run the application. This means that we have successfully installed and switched over to the standard preset. But let's also try to run it in the browser. I will make an error again. In the terminal, I will run npm run serve. Awesome, we get an ESLint error in our terminal, and we can also see this overlay in our application. So there is no way we can miss it. We have some options on how to fix the errors. One option is of course to fix them manually. Another option, which is very handy when you have many errors in many files, is to run npm run lint --fix. This command will try to fix as many errors as possible, and it will let you know if you need to take any additional actions yourself. Okay, perfect. This is how you install and customize an ESLint preset in your Vue 3 application. In this lesson, we will review the initialization code to understand how our Vue application is created and how it is mounted to the DOM. This lesson is optional, so if you are not interested in learning that, feel free to proceed with the next one. Let's open the main.js file where all these are happening. Let's have a closer look at the initialization syntax. What happens here is that the createApp function takes a root component, appView, as an argument and returns what we call a Vue instance. The argument, appView, in our example, is called the configuration object. Once we have a Vue instance, we have to mount it on an HTML element. In this case, we mount it to the DOM element with an ID of app. This is the element I showed you in our index.html file. In Vue 2, we had to specify an L property in the config object. But in Vue 3, we now have to use the mount function instead. Our Vue application will live inside the element it mounts to, and it will only have access to the children of this DOM element. This makes Vue very powerful and progressive, as it gives us a way to refactor and migrate functionality gradually. We could reuse this Vue instance later in the code for additional configuration, before we mount the application. To show you, I will create a variable forum app to store our Vue instance. To mount our instance on the DOM, we can call forumapp.mount. This way, we have the option to extend and configure our instance before we mount it to the DOM. For example, we can register a global component using the component instance function. Or we can install a plugin using the use instance function. This is how we will install plugins like Vuex and VueRouter later on. Let's see why the new syntax is great. The entire component tree, mounted by the application instance, shares the same context. This means that all the components of our application will have access to whatever we define here, including plugins, directives, global components, and so on. This syntax is actually quite similar to the syntax we used in Vue 2 applications. However, in Vue 2, it was impossible to isolate some of the functionality to only one of the Vue instances without it affecting the others, since the Vue applications were still using the same Vue object once imported from the library. That was problematic when isolation was important, like for example in unit testing. The new syntax in Vue 3 allows us to make the configuration of each application as an individual custom object, since the apps are configured using a dedicated method, the createApp, which creates new independent instances. This design trick gives us the possibility to have two or more isolated Vue instances that do not share any features by default, even if they are created in one file. I will create another Vue application to show you. I will call it another Vue app. To create the instance, I will use the createApp function and I will give it a component, Since I don't have another component here, I will give it up. So now that we have a new instance, the another view app, we can use another plugin here. Like, let's say that we have another plugin. And then, when we are happy with the configuration of the another view app, we can eventually mount it to the DOM. And here we can specify the ID of the DOM element where we want to mount it. So this can be the another app, let's say. And this way, we can have two different view applications or view component trees. One that will live in the div with the ID of app, and it will have this instance and this configuration and all the components that are defined here, and another view application that lives on the another app element, and it has this configuration. So here we have two totally independent view instances that mount on different elements, and they don't share any functionality unless we specifically want them to. I hope this explanation is useful. I will delete the second application as we don't need it, and I will clean up our forum app initialization code. We don't need any global settings or plugins for now. Finally, I will serve the application in the browser to ensure that I didn't break anything.